Good evening. My name is Daniel Hamburg, and this is 2020. Tonight we begin with a small man born in Georgia, a peanut farmer no less. On April 3rd, he formally announced his running for governor of Georgia, challenging frontrunner Carl Sanders. On November 2nd, he was elected President of the United States, beating out Republican nominee Gerald Ford. His name, James Earl Carter, better known as Jimmy Carter. Now to our correspondent, Alex Chu, in the field.
So, Mr. Sal, you're a very important part of the board and the cabinet in Carter's presidency. I want to ask you a few questions about Carter and some of his judicial acts.
Sure, just go ahead.
So, Mr. Sal, I know that Carter was a very strong supporter of human rights and humanitarianism. Did he do anything to show it in his judicial acts?
He believed in human rights, such as the freedoms and liberties in the Declaration of Independence. So he cut off relations and such as military aid to nations such as Argentina, Brazil, those who violated these rights.
That was a mouthful, if I may say so myself. Okay. So, the SALT II was a treaty between the U.S. and USSR, but it didn't really quite work out with Carter. What happened?
Well, the reason why it did not work, Alex, was because the Soviet Union was a communist country, so they denied rights to many of the citizens, so it also worked against Carter's thoughts about human rights. So it weakened its relations, first of all, and then second of all, the SALT II treaty, it gave U.S. a military disadvantage. So when it was about to be passed, Soviet Union, they invaded Afghanistan. So that was the last straw for Jimmy Carter. He just refused after that.
I heard that was some kind of peace treaty, and yes, I know Carter was a very peaceful man.
He was, yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was a very peaceful man, and
of course.
So he signed a lot of peace treaties, and there's a certain one called the Camp David Accords. Care to elaborate?
The Camp David Accords was a treaty between Israel and Egypt. And Egypt and Israel had tensions between each other since 1977. So what Jimmy Carter did was he brought the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Egypt all together in Camp David in Maryland to sign the Camp David Accord, which Egypt had to recognize Israel as a state, and Israel had to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula and give it back to Egypt.
Well then, Mr. Sal, thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. Of course.
You, Alex Chu. And now we... Breaking news from Iran. 66 hostages have just been taken from the United States Embassy. Now we take you to a live feed.
Good evening. In a closed meeting tonight with no cameras or microphones present, President Carter told a group of civic leaders from New England that some of the hostages in the embassy in Tehran have been threatened at pistol point and have not even been permitted to speak a word. The president added that he will work as best he can for the safety and the release of the hostages, but he added he will protect the honor of our country.
Well, here in Iran today, the Ayatollah Khomeini has again set the tone for Iranian politics. Today, the Ayatollah takes exception to the meeting of the Security Council at the United Nations. Under American influence, he said, the verdicts are dictated from the beginning.
On November 4th, 1979, Iranian militants stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran and took approximately 70 Americans captive. This terrorist act triggered the most profound crisis of the Carter presidency and began a personal ordeal for Jimmy Carter and the American people that lasted 444 days. President Carter committed himself to the safe return of the hostages while protecting America's interests and prestige. He pursued a policy of restraint that put a higher value on the lives of the hostages than on the American retaliatory power or protecting his own political future. The toll of patient diplomacy was great, but with President Carter's actions brought freedom for the hostages, with America's honor preserved. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Shah of Iran, began his regime in 1941, succeeding his father Reza Khan to the throne. In a 1953 power struggle with his prime minister, the Shah gained American support to prevent nationalization of Iran's oil industry, In return for assuring the U.S. a steady supply of oil, the Shah received economic and military aid from 8 American presidents. In the early 1960s, the Shah announced social and economic reforms, but refused to grant broad political freedom. Iranian nationalists condemned his U.S.-supported regime and his westernizing of Iran. During rioting in 1963, the Shah cracked down, suppressing his opposition. Among those arrested and exiled was a popular religious nationalist and bitter foe of the United States, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Between 1963 and 1979, the Shah spent billions of oil dollars on military weapons. The real piece of military strength was the loss of the popular support. Unable to sustain economic progress and unwilling to expand democratic freedoms, the Shah's regime collapsed in a revolution. On January 16, 1979, the Shah fled Iran, never to return. The exiled Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran in February 1979 and whipped popular discontent into rabid anti-Americanism. When the Shah came to America for cancer treatment in October, the Ayatollah incited Iranian militants to attack the U.S. On November 4th, the American embassy in Tehran was overrun and its employees taken captive. The hostage crisis had begun. President Carter suspended oil imports from Iran, and the UN Security Council called for the release of the hostages. He imposed economic sanctions. He also attempted in 1980 to rescue the hostages. However, 3 helicopters malfunctioned, and they were unable to follow through with the rescue. Eventually, the Ayatollah Khomeini agreed to release the hostages in exchange for unfreezing Iranian assets in the U.S. They were not released, however, until Reagan was president. The hostage crisis was part of the reason that Carter did not win re-election. And now to tell us more, here's Timo Chung.
A beautiful day, isn't it, Dr. Alex?
A beautiful day it is, and please, it's Alex, just Alex. Beautiful plants, beautiful air. Ah, the environment's so wonderful.
So, Alex, what do you believe was the main point of Carter's presidency?
Well, Timo, I believe strongly that one of the most important facts of Carter's presidency was the National Energy Act.
Ah, the National Energy Act. Well, let me ask you a few questions about it. Do you think that increasing tax prices on gas guzzling cars was a good thing or a bad thing?
Timo, I think the increase in taxes for these gasoline cars is an extremely good thing to do. You know why? Because, let me explain. It helps the environment. Less people are driving gasoline cars, and the environment is so much better.
Ah, I see then. Well, then what do you think about the incident at 3 Mile Island, about the nuclear plant? That made Americans reconsider about safety about nuclear power plants.
Timo, to speak of this 3 Mile Island incident, let me bring my consultant, Mr. Dr. Hamburg.